Welcome to this channel. Today I want to share with you a talk inspired by the words of Osho, an invitation to reflect deeply on the limits that we often impose on ourselves, or that we allow others to impose on us. Have you ever wondered how often rules, customs, or judgments can reduce your freedom to truly be who you are? Prepare to discover how an authentic life, made of personal choices and courage, is more important than blind obedience. Let's start right away, because life does not wait for those who are uncertain. Let's grasp together every nuance of this extraordinary adventure. Osho, Saints and Human Nature.
I have often observed how there is a widespread idea according to which saints are extraordinarily perfect beings, almost ethereal, far from common passions and weaknesses. However, I have also noticed that what many define as holy ends up taking the form of a profound rigidity, as if such individuals have given up on being alive in the fullest sense. It is a fascinating and at the same time painful phenomenon. The more a person appears devoid of human impulses and emotions, the more he is venerated. But up close, living next to such inflexible individuals is extremely tiring. I have seen with my own eyes how they can make those around them feel guilty for every fleeting joy, every pleasure or distraction, and this in the long run becomes an oppressive cage. In this regard, I remember very well the ashram of Mahatma Gandhi, universally considered a great saint. In that context, smoking was absolutely prohibited. I understand that smoking is not a healthy or advisable habit, and I certainly do not urge people to do it, but I have asked myself why it should be prohibited to such an extent that the slightest transgression is not tolerated. Often, in everyday life, even a small gesture like smoking offers people a brief interlude of relaxation, a pause that brings relief to the mind and body. It is more than fair to point out that smoking is harmful and can shorten your life. But if someone deliberately chooses to exchange a few years of existence for immediate pleasure, is it really our job to humiliate them? Wouldn't it be more humane, I wonder, to accept that everyone deals with stress in different ways? When I see someone smoking, I never think, here's a sinner, but rather I wonder what they're going through emotionally. Because after all, the cigarette is warm, and its filter can remind you of the sensation of a mother's nipple. There's a warmth that brings you back to the first experiences of comfort and security. It is a way, perhaps simple and not even the best, but still a way of dealing with tension, nervousness, restlessness. Condemning this search for comfort only makes the person even more rigid, who will feel judged and forced to hide instead of deeply processing his anxieties. I have noticed how religious or spiritual communities, which should be oases of peace, sometimes become real centers of guilt, where everything is forbidden: smoking, coffee, tea, even a simple moment of mental relief. This is why, in too many cases, spaces of inner research, such as the various ashrams, become places of constant tension. The idea of sacredness translates into an endless list of rules and prohibitions, preventing those who are part of it from living with spontaneity. People always feel under surveillance, and any impulse that escapes that rigor is labeled as a sign of weakness or even sin. Thus, I met individuals who, instead of finding serenity, lived in anxiety of being discovered performing common acts, such as drinking tea, which in the outside world would even be considered banal. This contradiction has always struck me. Is it possible that an environment dedicated to spiritual growth ends up fueling feelings of guilt and discomfort? I had a similar experience in college when I was invited to parties where alcohol was circulating, and I wondered if my abstinence would make others feel embarrassed. I didn't want my choice not to drink to become an indictment of them, as if I were a moral judge. So I opted for a Coca-Cola, a simple ploy that allowed me to blend in without anyone feeling guilty or uncomfortable. This episode illustrates how, at times, the perception of others regarding our conduct can heavily influence the climate of an encounter. It is not just about what is right or wrong to do with one's body, but how judgment or the fear of judgment can make a situation tense or unpleasant. I have always believed that company is a place to share experiences, not to stand on a pedestal. Gandhi, moreover, had an almost obsessive attention to cleanliness, which he considered close to God. This belief of his, although based on a principle of order and hygiene, could nevertheless lead to the violation of other people's privacy, leading him to inspect rooms or bathrooms in search of the slightest imperfection. It is an attitude that, beyond the value attributed to hygiene, ends up becoming a means of control, fueling a climate of constant apprehension. What amazes me, even today, is how so many people accept this kind of intrusion, convinced that the holy authority always knows what it's doing. Yet, if spirituality is meant to lead us to a state of inner freedom, it seems contradictory to me that it should border on a violation of our privacy. What I notice is that often, the more a saint manages to make the people around him feel guilty, the more his popularity increases. It is as if his figure were surrounded by an aura of severity that, for many, represents the sign of a high spiritual depth. In reality, in my opinion, it is only a mechanism of power, where authority feeds on judgments and condemnations. True spiritual evolution, on the other hand, should make us feel relieved and closer to our inner truth, not crushed and afraid of constantly making mistakes. In my personal path, I have always reiterated that a master is a light, a beacon that illuminates a path, but does not force anyone to follow him step by step. When I say that I don't believe in repression, I mean that authentic awareness does not come from the fear of being punished, but from a deep understanding of what one does and what one is. If a disciple has the opportunity to experiment, to fall and get up again, then he truly grows, developing a clear and honest look at his own weaknesses and potential. Conversely, if he is constantly terrified of breaking a rule or being caught in some impure act, his inner growth is stifled by the anxiety of pleasing a system of prohibitions. Countless times I have seen spiritual aspirants delude themselves that by annulling every human impulse they will become perfect. In truth, this denial of self and of their own nuances turns them into mechanical creatures, playing a part. Amputating one's humanity does not lead to true fullness, but to a kind of emotional stagnation. And when repressed impulses find a crack to resurface, they often explode in destructive forms, bringing with them an enormous burden of guilt. The growth process, on the contrary, should be a conscious journey in which every experience, positive or negative, is understood and integrated and not simply demonized. I have always argued that we should fully embrace our humanity in every facet. This does not mean wallowing in disorder or ignoring the consequences of what we do. Rather, it means understanding that we are complex beings, endowed with desires, passions, fragilities, and bursts of creativity. If someone insists on a model of holiness that completely excludes everything that is human, he ends up creating an environment where judgments and inhibitions reign, rather than serenity and freedom. I prefer a place where people, even knowing that smoking or drinking is not always positive, can still make an informed choice without feeling like they are being singled out as sinners. I myself have never wanted to elevate myself on a throne of superiority, to point the finger at anyone who deviates from an ideal of perfection. Rather, I feel compelled to encourage everyone to cultivate their own authenticity. Being alive also means understanding the value of a moment of foolishness or an unorthodox impulse, because sometimes it is precisely in those spaces of freedom and spontaneity that our true nature emerges. Holiness should not be an accumulation of restrictions, but an ability to bring light and understanding even into the shadowy areas of our existence. And if there is a spiritual achievement, in my opinion, it is not in boasting about how many temptations we have rejected, but in being able to say that we have truly understood and transcended our weaknesses, transforming them into bridges to a greater awareness. In my opinion, the role of a master who is not an inquisitor, but a support and a reflection of inner light, remains fundamental. I am convinced that life must be explored, savored, and understood in all its contradictions. The important thing is that this exploration occurs with clarity and responsibility, not with the fear of being pointed out or punished. Precisely for this reason, although I do not encourage vices or addictions at all, I always feel like remembering that the path of blind renunciation is not the path of true understanding. Self-conscious observation and compassion towards others represent, in my opinion, the most sincere core of any spiritual path. Ultimately, I believe we can live fully only if we learn not to condemn but to understand, not to erect barriers, but to find the path to greater inner freedom. If spirituality becomes a succession of prohibitions and police attitudes, then it is no longer spirituality, but a system of control. True sanctity, for me, sprouts when we manage to create a bridge between our human limits and that part of us that yearns for transcendence without denying them. In this spirit, I invite everyone not to fear their own desires or imperfections, but to illuminate them with the torch of mindfulness. It is in the encounter between our inner earth and the vastness of the spiritual horizon that we discover how rich and complete we are, without having to disguise ourselves as perfect machines or pure souls devoid of impulses. The authentic path, I am certain, passes through the understanding and inclusion of every part of ourselves, so that our transformation is not an act of denial, but of profound realization. If you liked this video, inspired by the words of Osho, or it gave you some food for thought, leave us a like and subscribe, or subscribe to our channel to support us in creating ever better content. Each of your support helps us to continue this path of sharing, to explore new themes, and to offer you new perspectives to enrich your daily life. Thank you for dedicating your time to us, and see you next time with other ideas to live life in a more conscious and authentic way.